Okay. Hello, hello. Gosh, I look so dark in here. I don't know why that's happening. But let me know if you guys can hear me okay. And I'm just meanwhile going to check my video settings because normally it's not so dark. I don't know why it's so dark today. Okay. Well, yes, let me know who's here. And also let me know if you guys can hear me okay, if the sound is working all right, at least. Hopefully that's working better than the lighting. Okay, wonderful. Good. Hello, Ashok. I hope you found a suitable wine to open. And I was going to mention that Ashok and Steve and a few people reached out to me about the tasting, and they were asking me questions about what they should open and what's appropriate and things like that, or what they should buy in one case for this tasting. And I wanted to let you guys know that you should always feel free to do that. It's kind of, a free gift that I give to you. An aspect of being able to come to these tastings is that I'll give you some advice, especially if you can't find the wine that I happen to be drinking. The one I'm drinking is a Bordeaux from Pessigouin Saint-Emilion, which is like kind of a satellite appellation, a satellite region outside the beautiful village of Saint-Emilion. It's a Chateau Guibault. And it's from 2015. So that's what I said I'll be tasting today. And we're going to talk about the tasting of that. But if you can't find the specific wine, I want to make sure you have something delicious to drink. I know my mom is drinking a Brunello di Montalcino, so she's in pretty good shape. And that's a beautiful aging wine. So she's great. Hello, Omar and Marisa from Mountain View, California. Hello. I love it. You guys have been joining so many of these. So thank you for joining the tastings. Good. Okay. Well, I think we've got enough people to get started. So, first of all, just let me offer a toast and cheers to all of you. I know these aren't easy times, so it means a lot that you're willing to show up and do fun things like wine tastings despite whatever hardships are going on in your life. So, cheers to you. Take a moment to celebrate that. Cheers. That's the way I've been doing it. Hi, Angie from Pennsylvania. Craig is here from New Jersey. Tony is here from Wine Tracker, and he's based in Seattle. Love Seattle. Miss my days of living in Seattle when I worked for Amazon. So, cheers to all of you. Thanks for showing up. And as people come on, just let me know you're here. Let me know where you're joining from if you want to. Ooh, we've got someone, Christian from Portland. Love it. Steve is here from Durham. Steve, I hope your wine worked out from Total Wine. And go ahead and let me know also what you're drinking, especially as you get into the tasting part of it. If you guys love what you're drinking, then definitely share it with everybody else so we can do a little crowd sharing of everybody's favorite wines. It'll be fun. Good. Okay. So if you don't know me, I'm Dini Rao. I host these wine tastings. I worked in the wine business for an awful long time now, for over 20 years, and I've been hosting wine tastings for pretty much all of the time in my wine career. I've hosted wine tastings for all sorts of people, including British royalty, during my time at Christie's auction house. And of course, during my time at Christie's is really where I got to understand this whole concept of aging wine, of cellaring wine for long periods of time, and what that does to a wine, and how to enjoy it, and all of the great things that we're going to talk about today. So that's where a lot of my experience with all of this comes from. Good. All right. So we are drinking Tobin James 5. So is it 05, a Bordeaux blend? Okay, great. So you've got a Bordeaux blend. Your delivery didn't arrive in time, but you've got Tamarack Cellars. Love the Firehouse Red. Great Washington wine. Tamarack, I think they're over in Walla Walla. Sorry, my cat's meowing. I guess she wants food right now. Good. And Craig, you found some Saint-Emilion. Perfect. And yours already has a fair amount of bottle age. So you've got 2004 going. Good. Well, normally when I have you guys tasting something like Bordeaux, I might give you some notes ahead of time to go ahead and decant the wines or aerate them or something like that. But today I specifically didn't do that. And we're going to talk about why I didn't do that. But I did want you guys to all get an experience of the wine. So the first thing to know is that in all of my wine tastings, you don't have to wait for me to taste. At any time, go ahead, sip your wine, enjoy your wine. We are going to go through, like a little bit more of a formal tasting in a bit. but I want to give you some background and things like that. And while I'm doing that, I want to make sure you're drinking the wine. So you don't need my blessings to drink the wine. Or if you think you did, you have them. Good. Cheers from Birmingham. Awesome. Wow. Amazing. Marque de Tomares wine. Tony says, what? Yeah, exactly. And hello from New York City. I'm also in New York City. Hope you're hanging in there, David. Perfect. So, okay. So here's kind of an initial question. We're talking about how to age wine, but there's kind of some questions that come before that. And one of those is why to age wine. And, there may be a lot of people that choose to age wine for different reasons, but two of the main reasons people might choose to age wine are for either profits or for pleasure. And if you're looking at it from a profit perspective, I know my mom's always looking at investments and things. And typically, wine as an asset class has about a 13% return per annum. And that's been over the course of the past 30 years, that's been pretty steady. So, wine is interesting as an investment. The other really interesting thing is you don't have to pay capital gains taxes on them. Talk to your tax advisors more about that. But as far as my understanding is, unless anything's changed, you don't, which is pretty cool. But I will say that all of the rules about investing in wine really are very kind of strict in that you should be only investing in blue chip types of places like Bordeaux and Burgundy and a little bit of California and a little bit of Champagne and a little bit of other regions. But you really can't go too off the beaten track. When I was at Christie's and I would go into people's cellars all the time, I would go through half of their cellar that may have been bought for passion because they loved the wines or they visited the region or, it was highly recommended in delicious wines, but they just don't have the resale value to them, A, and B, they've got to be stored impeccably. They ideally need to be stored in all 12 bottle or full case increments to retain all their value and a lot of things like that. So those wines aren't really so much for pleasure as much as what we're going to spend the majority of time talking about here, which is some of you who might be choosing to age your wines for pleasure reasons that you're interested in maybe doing it as a hobby. So yes, and Tony asked, so is the Chateau Guibault Puisaguin an ageable wine? Absolutely. We're going to talk about the qualities that make it an ageable wine. And you're also Christian is also drinking a 2015 Centimillion from Chateau Le Caz Bellevue. Delicious, delicious wine. I have to tell you, I'm so excited that so many people have Centimillion wines because I have a love affair with Centimillion. If you've never been there, you absolutely must go. It's a beautiful village. I stayed there when I was in Bordeaux tasting futures of wines, which are the barrel samples of wines that will in the future be released and things. And so it's a really great way to spend your time in Bordeaux. Much more charming than the other side of the river. Okay, so what do I want to tell you about? So then when it comes to pleasure of collecting wine and investing in wine and aging wine, you really want to think about first, is it for me? Will I like older wine? Because I'll tell you, a lot of my clients at Christie's used to come in and they would say, Dini, I bought a lot of wine because my wine store guy, he told me that this would be great wine to age. So I've been aging it for years, but then I opened up and I tasted it and I really liked it better when it was young. This would be like the side secret that a lot of collectors would tell me. And I get that because I think that wine changes a lot. I'm going to talk to you about how it changes, but wine over time changes tremendously for reasons that even the scientists can't quite pinpoint. All of them. And so really you want to figure out if you enjoy older wines. So here are some of the things that are going to change in the wine. And this is a good moment to go ahead and taste your wine. So let's go ahead and I always say sniff your wine before you start swirling it. Get an impression of the wine. Let it impress you. And then give it a swirl and smell it again. And when you do that, of course, you're waking up all the aromas of the wine. And you can give it a smell. And the things to think about when it comes to ageability are the concentration levels of this wine. And the wine, if you've just opened it right now and it's fresh out of the bottle without much aeration, it may not have opened up yet. So maybe it's not quite very concentrated, but you could pay attention to, is it concentrated? The other thing you would know is how fresh is the fruit. And by concentrated, I mean, how strong does it smell? Does it smell pretty strong? Does it knock you over the head? Or is it pretty soft and delicate in its smells? And then I was talking about the freshness of the fruit. So think about, cherries that you smell. Are they like fresh, ripe cherries, or they're more like a dried cherry or even stewed, cooked cherries? The fresher one is going to belong to a younger wine. That's one of the many, many things that will happen as a wine ages is the aromas will start to change from those fresh fruit aromas to more dried fruits, more cooked fruits, and then a lot of non-fruit flavors. So if you're the type of person that you love the jammy wines, the fruit forward wines that just explode with that freshness, you're going to lose a lot of that and it's going to change. You're going to gain a lot of other things too. So if you smell this wine, and this might be a good moment too, if any of you are smelling anything in particular in your wine, especially Craig, who has a little bit of an older bottle aged wine, it's a good time to shout out some of those things so that we can start to get a handle on what are some of the things you smell in aged wines. Yeah. So, for instance, in this wine, for those of you who are tasting along with me, and it's okay if you can't pick up these specific things because when you first start tasting, it takes a little bit of practice, but you might start to smell some tobacco in this wine. And again, it'll change. Like sometimes in the younger wines, I smell like fresh leaf tobacco. And as it ages, it's a little bit more like maybe like a cigar or even pipe smokes tobacco. You'll start to smell things that kind of remind you of a grandmother's closet, like dusty smells, maybe even like saddle leather. Again, you're thinking of things that really have age to them and have some savory notes to them, that have some more spice to them. Those are all the smells that will start to pick up as those fresh fruit flavors kind of decline in the wine. In wine tasters terms, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but they break it down into three categories of smells. There's primary fruit smells that come from the grapes themselves. There's secondary smells that come from all the things that happen in the fermentation and the making of the wine. And then there's tertiary smells, which are the offshoots, right? Tertiary is a word of offshoots. And those are the smells that really come from that bottle aging process that you get over time. Now, Ashok had asked me a really good question about like how old is old, and this is so relative because especially for Americans, I guess, as a society, we're typically don't age our wines for a long time. So for us, sometimes an aged wine could be 5-10 years, versus the French tradition or the British tradition where sometimes 30-40 years is really the minimum. That's when you start to say like, okay, I think this wine might be actually approaching maturity or time or horizon where I want to be able to drink it. By the way, this is a little bit more of a technical wine tasting than a lot of them that I do. A lot of them that I do are more introductory ones. So if anybody feels like the words I'm throwing out or the terms I'm throwing out are not clear to you, then just back me up and let me know, and I'll explain them further. Yeah? Okay, because I don't want to lose anybody and I want to make sure you guys are with me. Okay. And by the way, let me know. I'm hearing from some people what you're drinking, but I'll love to hear from more of you what you are drinking. So, will you like aged wine? Okay, a couple of the things that are going to happen. The color is going to change. So, we don't really talk too much about this color. The best way to assess your color is always to look at the wine against a white background, because then you're going to have a consistent way of looking at it, and you're not going to get the color of the table, the color of your rug, and all those other things. So, looking at it against the red background, this one still has a lot of red color in it, even a little bit of purpley color to it. But as the wine ages, you'll start to see your wine. And Craig probably is seeing that in his wine, he's seeing some different colors. So he might start to see some of the garnet red colors come in, or even some orangey brick like colors, right? And then it eventually turns to more brownish colors. And then the fascinating thing is that the polymerization of the color in wine will start to drop out. So it'll settle at the bottom. And as a red wine gets very, very old, you can hardly tell the difference between an old red wine from an old white wine because it almost looks like the orangey yellowish color of an old white wine. Okay. So Tony says, is it true that the primary aromas taste diminish over time and the secondary and tertiary, I would call it, but tributary could be as well, come forward? Absolutely. Yes. That is exactly the process of the aromas. You hit it head on. Right. So, so color changes, tannin changes. Okay, so this is a good moment to taste the wine because up until now I've mainly been smelling it. But go ahead and give it a taste. And you guys can see I'm doing slurping as well. I promise you, even the royals do it. Totally fine to do. And this is where you suck in air. It's kind of the reverse of whistling, and hold the wine towards the front of your mouth so you don't choke on it. Suck in some air, and it's going to send all the aromas of the wine up through your nasal passages. It's also going to accentuate certain things like the tannins of the wine. And when I say tannins, I'm talking about the bitterness, the drying aspect that comes from the skins, the stems, and sometimes the oak barrels, the oak aging from the wine. And all of those things taste kind of like the bitterness that you get in black tea, like that drying effect at the very end of a cup of black tea. Those are tannins, right? So when you taste tannins in this wine, and for some people, especially if you're not yet eating any food, it can be a little drying. It can be a little bitter. It can be like a little overwhelming, especially the more you drink it, they build up on your tongue. So if you don't love that effect, you might enjoy the wine with some age because over time, the tannins are some of the things that start to bind and they will soften over time. Their whole nature will completely change and change from that structured, gritty, gripping, drying effect to a much softer texture in the wine. And it won't have as much drying. It's kind of you can kind of simulate that by decanting your wine, so giving it some air for a couple hours. So one of the reasons that I had you guys not open your wine ahead of time, which you would normally do probably for a Bordeaux like this, is I wanted you to experience this. And then I'm going to give you a homework assignment, which is to go ahead and wait and leave some in your glass just open like this and go back and taste it again in an hour, go back and taste it again tomorrow and keep tasting it and see how those tannins soften up in the wine and the aromatics also come more alive, how you can smell it much more and it becomes more effusive. These are some of the things that'll happen with aging the wine more. So if you enjoy that effect of the wine, you might enjoy aging wine. That's not the only thing that'll happen, but that's kind of simulates part of the process of it. And over lots and lots of time, the tannins will almost again drop out and feel almost like it's a white wine, like they're hardly even there. And of course, that's one of the things that makes a young wine really good with like a piece of steak or grilled vegetables or something like that, salami, meats, because it complements those really well. So the older wines kind of change in their food pairings as well. So Craig says, no decant on his 2004, beautiful leather, coffee. Yeah, coffee's another one I love from aged wine. Tobacco leaf aromas, pencil lead, dried flowers. Dried flowers is another one of my favorite aspects of older wines. You'll get fresh flowers in the young wines, dried flowers in the older ones. And it still has a nice base of dark fruits, cassis, red cherries, and some brighter berries. So you guys can tell Craig's at a very advanced level. So, you don't have to be able to describe your wines in all those terms to be able to join the chat and kind of chime in with what you're getting. So Ashok says, when we visited vineyards in southern France, much of the discussion was about what you smell is based on the soil type and nearby vegetations. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah. So soil type, I keep hearing from my master winemaker friends that soil type does affect the aromas of the wine. It's not necessarily that you'll smell the soils in the wine. So it's not quite one-to-one like that, but certainly the surrounding vegetation, the ground cover, the types of yeast they're using, the grape variety they're using, the types of barrels they're aging it in, all of these things. There's so many factors that contribute to aromas. But definitely the place where it's coming from and the things that are going on there are part of the contributors in that. But when you break down where grape wine aromas come from, there's actually tons and tons of factors that play into it. It's super fascinating. And actually, Ashok, you give me a great idea. That would be a good idea for a whole tasting, would be to talk about where the aromas in wine come from, because it's very interesting. So we talked about the tannins and what's going to happen a little bit with that. The other thing is the acidity. So go ahead and take another sip of your wine. And this time, I want you to pay attention to what happens in the sides of your mouth. That's called the acidity. It's kind of that pucker that you get in lemonade. It makes your mouth water. And so that acidity is giving the wine some of the freshness. It's actually one of the requirements that'll make a wine age. So, part of the things we're talking about is what will change in the wine. But I'm also, hopefully, we're going to have enough time to do this. I was also going to talk to you about what the key components are that you look for in a wine that's going to age. So the acidity is going to also soften. So in general, the wine is going to get softer in your mouth. The aromatics, the perfumey quality of the wine, because the structure of the wine is softening, the smells and aromatics lift up, and it's almost like you're tasting the smells more than anything else, is kind of the feeling I get in a wine. They can also be very long lasting. So I'll never forget the experience I had of tasting 1990 Musigny. It was an aged wine. And I was working in retail at the time, and it was Thanksgiving. It was really busy. And I went back on the floor after tasting the wine. I was helping all these people. And as I was helping everyone choose their Thanksgiving wines, I was tasting this wine over and over. And it hit me in waves, all the different flavors and the complex layers that I kept tasting of different things. So if that experience sounds really interesting to you, you might really enjoy aging your wine. Okay. So, what makes a wine age worthy? Okay, there are a couple things for that. One is the acidity that we were just talking about, and the reason why the acidity preserves it is a lot. This, yeah, exactly, Tony. Right? Everybody wants that experience. It's so worthwhile, especially when you've kind of purchased that bottle. You've had it when it's young, and you get the experience of aging it over time. It's like such a treat when then you get that bottle that explodes in your mouth and gives you that experience. So the acidity is going to act. So everyone's had the experience of like cutting apples and they brown, they oxidize. So oxidation is one of the processes that deteriorates a wine over time, that degrades it and makes it less good, but also, in slow amounts, makes it age and evolve. So if you put lemon on your apples, what happens? It slows the oxidation, right? So the acidity in the wine is going to do the same thing. So when you have acidity in wine, when you have tannin in wine, when you have sweetness in wine, and when you have good fruit concentration, if you have a combination of all those things, or even just a couple of those things, that wine is going to be a good candidate to age very well. That's why the wines of Bordeaux are some of the best aging wines out there, because they have great varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc that have lots of tannin to them. They have good amounts of acidity, the wines, and you have excellent fruit concentration from higher quality wines. This is why just when you're buying like a $10 Bordeaux or whatever, it's not really going to age as long. It's not meant for aging. The $10 Bordeaux is meant to drink right now because it doesn't have all the structure that when they're making a higher quality wine, they're taking a lot of time and care to give it more of that structure that's going to help the wine age over time. Does that make sense? So then some other factors are the sweetness. So everybody forgets about sweetness, but sweetness, this is why wines from Sauternes like the Chateau Yquem, or ice wine, or a lot of dessert wines, port, age for years and years and years. Some of the oldest wine that I've tasted back to the 1700s, because I've tasted wine that they used to toast the Declaration of Independence, were Madeiras. And Madeira is a wine that ages for a long time for two reasons. One, because it has sweetness to it. Many of them do, are very sweet. And the second thing is they're fortified. A fortified wine is when they add in spirit to the wine and it elevates the alcohol level and it really fortifies or strengthens the wine and makes it very, very stable to age over a long time. And alcohol is a tricky one because if you have a wine, a table wine that's not fortified and has a high amount of alcohol, it might not age so well. So alcohol is a double-edged sword. I always get that phrase wrong, but I think that's it. Good. Okay, so Craig says, why are minerals or minerality often mentioned as giving a wine more perceived freshness? That's a great question. I never thought about why that was, but I definitely experienced that. In the wine I immediately I think of Bordeaux, and I also think of Sancerre. So I did a whole tasting all about minerality that you guys can see in my archives on can you have 2 out of 3, Tony? Absolutely. Yes. Yes, you don't need all of those, especially tannins you don't have in those sweet wines, Chateau Yquem, for instance, and it still ages very well. But I did a whole tasting on, going back to Craig, I did a whole tasting on minerality and wine, and we tasted especially some Sancerre in that tasting, and I think some Chablis and other wines that have this perceived minerality in wine. And it's so hard to describe to someone until you take them through an actual wine that has it. But there is such a refreshing quality in the minerality. And also, I think like the salinity of the wines and there are actual minerals, right? Potassium and other minerals like, I can't remember the names of the other minerals in the wine, but when you have that feeling, there is a refreshing feeling to the wine. Absolutely. And I think also the other reason I would say, Craig, I'm just spitballing this, but those wines tend to be higher in acidity. And the higher acidity also gives that feeling of freshness. So you can perceive them more. That would be my guess. I have to think more about it though. Okay, so you can definitely have 2 out of the 3, Tony. Okay, so what makes a wine age worthy? Structure, acidity, tannins, fruit concentration, alcohol, but not in too high a doses of alcohol. So lower side of alcohol, because the alcohol is basically volatile in a wine. So if you get too much alcohol, then it can actually degrade and spoil the wine, and it will not help it age. And I'm talking about aging for like over 10 years. And then if it's fortified, then it's going to be nice and strong. Yeah, good. So Craig says, thank you. My pleasure. So another thing I want you guys to notice in terms of the quality of this wine is really when you taste it, there's a very long lasting finish, or I get a long lasting finish. I don't know what you guys are getting in your wine, and I'd love to hear about your experience with your wine. But if you get that, the long lasting kind of persistent finish, meaning after you swallow the wine kind of stays with you, it's one of the signs of a higher quality wine. So it's something that you can look for to see whether or not that wine is going to be quality worthy and therefore age worthy, because the quality level is one of the factors in the ageability of the wine. Like I said, when it comes to port and other things, it doesn't have to be super high quality because it may have all those structural elements that are just going to help it age forever. I have a lot of German Riesling, speaking of sweetness, I have a lot of German Riesling that has very high acidity, high sugar levels, and they weren't very expensive bottles to begin. But I have ones dating back to the 60s and 70s that have aged really, really well just because of that combination of the acidity and the sweetness that allowed them to age and do well, despite the fact that they weren't $50 plus bottles at all. Let's see. So I know I have a lot of very, very fortunate experiences of drinking delicious wine. Do you guys have any questions about this wine in particular? And also, I'd love to hear from you, like, what's your interest in aging wine? Are you interested maybe in doing it as a hobby? Are you interested in doing it just to drink your own wines? Are you interested from a scientific perspective? Maybe my mom, the scientist, wants to just like see what happens as the wine age, or do you want it as a financial investment? I would love to know what everyone's interests are. So if you want to, give a drop in the comments about that. The other thing I'll say is It's very important that if you are going to age wine, to age it well. So, if you're doing it as a financial investment, the very best thing to do is to put it in professional storage, because then you can give it what's called really good provenance, where not only have you stored it well, but you have records of how you've stored it well. And that's always going to help any potential buyer out there, to give them some confidence of like, okay, I know it's been stored well. And what is stored well? It means that it was stored at a cool, even temperature. 57 degrees is kind of like the ideal cellar temperature, but I'll tell you that the colder you store it, the slower the wines will evolve. Like, I've been in some cellars where they stored it in the 40s, and those wines they barely even age. It was very slow. So if you're young and you're getting into this, keep your cellar cold and the wines will live a long time. If you're older and you're getting into this, don't keep your cellar so cold. Maybe even keep it like at 60 or something like that, because you want the wines, you want them to evolve, but you want them to evolve slowly and in the right way. So don't keep it at like 80, but maybe don't keep it so cold. And even is good, because you don't want all those fluctuations. You want it to be dark. You want it to be nice and humid, so the corks stay moist and on their side and they don't let in any air. Good. So David's interested simply for fun. Wonderful. Is there a recommended time frame for aging, assuming it depends on the wine? Yes, it does depend on the wine. You have a Brunello di Montalcino from 2012, and you don't want to overage it, but you want to keep it for a special occasion. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so my mom's drinking in 2011 Brunello di Montalcino, and it's amazing. So this is such a good question, is like how long to age it? And there is an aspect of it that is particular to the wine, and there's an aspect of it that's particular to your taste. And so it's figuring out, you need to do a little bit of experimentation to figure out where you enjoy the wine most in its curve, right? So if the wine starts out here and it's really, really tight, and then it starts to open up, and all the flavors come out, and then there's a certain decline of the fruit and things like that. So some people I know love to drink the wine like very end, like when it's practically dead. They love that phase of the wine. So it's good to know, and you can experiment. There's some really good wines out there, like a producer called Chiaretto from Barolo, and they release a lot of their wines later. There's some great Chianti producers out there who release their wines right now. You could go out and buy some Chianti from the 1970s and 1980s, and you could taste those, and they're not super expensive. You could taste those and say like, huh, do I like that? Figure out how old you like your wines in general. And then there are really great, you can Google vintage charts out there and things like that, so that you can see for Brunello in particular. So for Brunello, I mean, easily 20 years. I mean, right now it's only been 8 years. So you're nowhere near in danger, assuming it's from a good producer, but you're nowhere near in danger of over aging that puppy. I mean, that Brunello wines are really meant to age for 20 plus years easily, because they're very structured wines, very tannic, really good intensity to them, and good acidity. Italian wines have fantastic acidity to them. So really meant for good aging. The other thing, I don't have my gadget out right now, but there's a lovely gadget called the Coravem. And this is my favorite application of the Coravem. The Coravem basically has like a medical grade needle that you can stick into the cork, and you can extract some of the wine to taste it without compromising the cork at all. And so, it's kind of an expensive gadget, a couple $100s, but in doing that, it keeps the wine in perfect condition, but allows you to taste a little bit, so you can check in with the wine and see. And so I'll do that from time to time. If I'm not sure how a wine's aging, I'll give it a little taste and say like, oh, you know what? It's not quite there where I want it to be. It's still pretty tannic, or it's still pretty like dense, and I want it to open up. I want it to be softer. And that's the way I like it. So I hope that helps, David. If you have more questions about that, go ahead and ask. Good. Okay. So, Tony, you're into having a mind blowing, life changing tasting experience with aged wine. Perfect. That's like the ultimate way to enjoy it, I think. And you love to age your own wine, Craig, because you feel like they evolve the most. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and my mom says older bottles should have a graph on the table so that we know what phase they're in, and the label. Yeah, exactly. That would be really too logical, mom. You always think so logically about like what would be useful information. But it's pretty easy to Google these things and see. And it's funny because I used to write a lot of those tasting notes in the catalogs and Christie's about this wine. It's expected drinking range. We'll give a drinking window usually of, like from 20 to 30 years from now or whatever it is. But those drinking windows I really find are very personal. And then it also depends on how it's been stored. So again, if your wine hasn't been stored in great conditions, meaning maybe from time to time it gets up to 80 degrees or whatever it is, or you're not sure how it was stored, then you're going to want to shorten that window and drink it definitely on the earlier side. Like one day, I'll tell you guys this quick story and then I have to end. One day, my daughter, when she was younger, I found her messing around on my wine fridge and she had like adjusted all the temperatures on the wine fridge and made everything super warm. And so I was like, oh my God. And I just basically ended up drinking a lot of the things from that wine fridge pretty soon because I was like, I have no idea how long she's been playing with this, how many days she's been playing with this. And so the wines might have been like all at different temperatures. And so I thought, okay, not going to take any risks with it. So there's a lot of factors for when you should open the wine. Good. Yeah, Craig also loves the idea of the graph. Good. Well, I went over my 30 minutes already, but I wanted to make sure we had so much to cover in this. And it was really fun. And actually, this would make a great topic for some of the private wine tastings I've been doing, which are either an hour or an hour and a half long. You guys can always reach out to me if you want to schedule one of those for you and your group of friends to do over Zoom. They've been really fun. We've been choosing all sorts of fantastic topics with food pairings and things like that. And maybe we'll even do like a longer master class on this at some point because there's so much to talk about with aging wine. And I hope at the very least I've given you a little bit of fodder to start to think about and investigate more and just start experimenting and playing around. I think the best case scenario is I knew of one collector who he basically funded his drinking project of drinking aged wines by investing in the wine. So he would go out and buy these blue chip wines and he'd buy two cases and he'd buy one to store and invest and sell so that he could pay for the first case that he bought so he could pay to drink that. So, like find creative ways to go out and fund your new hobby that hopefully you guys are all inspired to go out and age some wine to do. Good. My pleasure. This is so much fun. Thank you guys all so much for joining. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel, subscribe to my email list so you can find out about future tastings and join me. Okay, good. Cheers. Yay, Martinique. You wanted funny. Martinique, I didn't know you're here. Hello. Nice to see you. Good. Okay. Martinique has fabulous, fabulous salami, by the way. If you guys are looking for some good salami, they're Coro Foods salamis, and they're unbelievable. I did a whole tasting on those. Good. All right. And thank you for joining, Omar, Steve. Thank you all. Bye bye.